TSD mindfulness. There's one thing I know, and that's that you've probably never heard of it before. It's brand new, and so this is really exciting that you're here at the beginning and here to learn and here to check it out and here to see if this is something that you want to spend more time learning about. So let me just jump right in and start explaining to you what it is so you have a better understanding. I can give you a bit of a summary of the practice. What's really important to understand about TSD mindfulness is that it is a practice in zoning in, focusing on what's going on in the head area, the head space. We often refer to that as the mind, as well as the gut, what's going on in the gut, and what's going on in the heart. So what we're going to be learning is this system of the head, the gut, and the heart, and learning about how these different parts of the system affect one another, and learning about how we can affect these different parts of our system, this temperamental system of the heart and the head and the gut, and how we cannot necessarily affect this system, this temperamental system. And so that's where the mindfulness is really key, is that ability to tune in and observe and be aware of these parts of this system so we can get to this point where we start to understand how we can affect the system in a positive way and how we really don't have an effect on the system and what we need to surrender to. So that's a really a good gist of TSD mindfulness. I'll go into more detail to kind of explain a couple of these concepts to you. So what happens when we work with this system is we create balance and stability in our lives, in our being, in the way we feel in our lives. A typical mindfulness practice is more geared toward the head and the mind and what's going on in here, and also tuning in to the body, which we'll go into a little bit more detail about the subtleties of those relationships. But what's different here is we're going to also use certain techniques to zone into our gut area and our heart area and see how those work together. In the gut, we're going to become mindful of impulses, of gut reactions, things like that. In the heart, we're going to become aware of these like rhythmic symbols that come about through our practice when we focus on the heart. So these rhythmic symbols that come about in the heart and the emotions of the heart. So the emotions in the heart, these rhythmic symbols, we'll get in tuned with using this mindfulness, a certain type of mindfulness practice. And when we tune into the heart, some of you may have already been doing some similar work, but when we tune into the heart, we are going to get in touch with anything from some trauma to joy, right? And everything in between. There's a lot there. And what happens is the stuff going on in our head and the stuff going on in our gut, it distracts us from what's going on in our heart. So another important thing to understand about what TSD mindfulness is that it's a practice in moving our consciousness into our heart center. And it's amazing. It's amazing what will open up, what we'll become aware of, new perspectives, new awarenesses, and some of that could be a little trauma, but in order to see everything, we see that and the joy, and then getting in touch with true joy that's there in our heart, that when we're not in a spiritual practice, not having a meditation practice, we're often distracted from that because of what's going on in our head and what's going on in our gut. And then we move into the heart area, then we become more in tune with the reality that's going on in our heart area, which is so important. And all of that going on in our heart area affects our relationships and relationships with everything, relationships not only with people, but relationships with the things in our lives, with our work, with our free time, with the foods that we eat, and so forth. I'll probably talk a little bit about that. But just essentially, another gist of TSD mindfulness is this taming of the mind, soothing of the gut, and dwelling in the heart. So again, we're taming the mind, which is very much like typical Buddhist mindfulness practice. We'll talk about that a lot. And then that soothing of the gut, which might be a little bit different than some of the practices that you've been working on. And then dwelling in the heart, like really being in that heart area and using those mindfulness skills to allow this process to happen. So some of the benefits of practicing TSD mindfulness: relationships will improve. Like I said, not only the people in your lives, but the things in your lives. So you can think more a little about, you can take a moment and consider what some of those things are in your life. Like I said, free time, the food we eat, work, finances, media, politics, and then with friends, family, coworkers, for those people in our lives. So I'll say that again. With our work, we have a relationship with our work, the food that we eat, our free time, finances, a relationship with the media, politics, family, friends, coworkers, and I'm sure there's so many other things and groups of people that you can think about that you have relationships with. We have relationships with everything. Some relationships aren't just as charged as others. We have a relationship with the table that sits in front of us. We have a relationship with everything that's around us. So that's why this practice is so powerful, because we are enhancing and making those relationships more real and more connected, or disconnected sometimes. Sometimes what this practice does is it actually will help you disconnect from certain things. So it's moving into that relationship that's good for you, however that looks. And the TSD mindfulness practice allows you to have this awareness of the motives that drive your relationships, the feelings that drive these relationships, your desires that drive these relationships. So that's another benefit, is this new awareness of how things that are going on in your system, of your head and your gut and your heart, how that system is affecting the way that you interact with the different things and people in your life, and understanding on a new level these motives, these feelings and desires. So I'm saying some of this and it might sound complicated, all these different things that we're thinking about and these different aspects that we're putting together, but it's really not complicated. It's actually very simple. It's simple, just this taming of the mind, the soothing of the gut, and the dwelling in the heart. And what happens is we're letting go of what does not serve us, through this practice. We're embracing what does serve us. We are setting stronger boundaries between us and what doesn't serve us. And then we're also loosening up boundaries to things that do serve us, that maybe our boundaries are too tight. And so through this practice, we're able to loosen those boundaries. So that's one of the ways that you'll see this practice having a real effect in your world and in your life. And it does have a lot to do with perspective. I don't know if you've read some of the research and some of the information out there about actually perceiving from the heart. Our culture everything around us is really supporting us to perceive from our mind, from our head. And so it's this idea that we're moving our consciousness more into our heart and perceiving more from our heart, and things look different. The world looks different when you perceive it from your heart than when you perceive it from your head. And so that's another benefit or part of this practice is learning how to do that. I want to talk about stress and how TSD mindfulness has an effect on stress, and how it's related to stress. Because stress reduction is a huge benefit of practicing TSD mindfulness. Have you ever noticed how you sometimes use your typical mindfulness practice, if you're someone that's already practicing mindfulness? And have you ever noticed that sometimes when you practice your typical mindfulness practice, it helps your stress and you relieve the stress, but there's sometimes when it just doesn't. It's you practice and practice, and you're tuning in and doing the mindfulness, yet your stress is not affected. It's not affected. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and explain why that's happening. Stress originates either in the mind, in the headspace, and in TSD mindfulness we call that the mental field. So stress either originates in your mental field, or stress originates in your gut field, or stress originates in your heart field. And so depending on where that stress originates, we need to use a little bit different, a little subtle difference in our technique in addressing that stress. So if you have stress that originates in the mental field, in our mind, then the typical mindfulness practice is going to work. It's going to work. The way that typical mindfulness practice is built, it's built to address the mind and taming the mind and relaxing any stress that is created in the mind. It's not designed to address stress that originates in the gut or address stress that originates in the heart. And I know that's probably a big something to chew on, and maybe something that you don't necessarily agree with, and that's okay. We can just kind of go with this, and you can try it out for yourself and see if it works. But one thing maybe you're thinking is, well, what about the body? Mindfulness, there's, we often tune into our stress that's in the body. But what happens is the stress originates in the mind and it manifests itself in the body. Or the stress originates in the heart and it manifests itself in the body. Or the stress originates in the gut and then it manifests itself in the body. So that's why I haven't said that stress originates in the body. It manifests in the body. So a few things here. One is that TSD mindfulness will help you be mindful enough to realize where that stress is originating. Or to realize, is it originating in my mind, my mental field? Is it originating in my heart, or is it originating in my gut? And then you can work with it in a little bit subtler ways depending on where. So for example, if it originates in, let me just check my notes here, I don't want to miss something. So I'll go ahead and start talking about the gut. And so if the stress originates in the gut, it's driven by a fear that something is going to change, because the gut is really based on this fear of change. And so if we have a stress that's in originating in the gut area, then if we use a practice that helps address this fear of change, then that's how we soothe. That's one way we can soothe the gut and we'll have a class just on that, working on soothing the gut through this fear of change. But it's a real method in soothing and calming. And it's so amazing. You'd be surprised because if you get it, you realize that the stress is starting in your gut. It's originating there, not in your head. You've tried to use regular mindfulness and it's not really having an effect. And then you can start to feel and realize that it's in the gut. And then you use this approach, it can shift so quickly. And it's a really the gut is very responsive. It can be very based in fear and can really send stress through our entire body. But it's also very responsive when we start to address the gut and its fear. So that's the good news. All right. So like I said, the mindfulness teachings are brand new. It's new. So this is exciting that you are here. You are a founding student. And although the practice is new, you will see it reflected in many things around you. You will see these concepts reflected in biology. You will see them reflected in psychology. You will see them reflected in spirituality, certain religions, and things like that. For example, this trinity of the mind, the gut, and the heart is reflected in biology of the brain, the reptilian brain, the limbic brain, and then the neocortex. Right, the neocortex can be correspond to the mental field in TSD mindfulness teachings. The limbic brain can be associated with the heart field of TSD teachings, and the reptilian brain can be associated with the gut. So that's just one example of this logic, emotion, instinct system showing up in other places in your world. And many of the approaches that I'll be sharing with you for TSD mindfulness, you may have heard different places or maybe not. But I just want to be really clear that this is a new practice. It's something new, even though you may have heard bits and parts of it other places that you've been. And since it is new, there is a chance that this will be something that will grow and more people will want to learn it. And if you find it to be very effective and life-changing, you may decide that you would like to teach it to groups of people in your area. So that's something exciting to think about, that maybe one day you will be a teacher of TSD mindfulness and bringing this to people that are in your circles. So please keep that in mind. That is something I'm completely open to when you feel ready to start teaching this to others. So since TSD mindfulness is new, I can't refer you to a bunch of research that shows that TSD mindfulness works, right? We don't have that yet. So what I'd like to invite you to do is to take the TSD challenge. And with the TSD challenge, what you're doing is you are going to experiment by practicing taming your mental field, soothing your gut field, and dwelling in your heart field for, let's say, 5 times a week for 30 days. So practicing TSD mindfulness for 5 days a week for 30 days is the challenge. And I invite you to do this challenge because I'm quite confident that after 30 days, you're going to be like completely wowed. You are going to be really surprised how quickly and interestingly things will shift in your world. Relationships